Hi everyone, we're Group 1 and we're going to be talking about classical conditioning. We hope you enjoy our video.
Go.
Hi, my name is Diego Baez. I'm going to be explaining unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response. So an unconditioned stimulus is something that naturally triggers a response without any learning. And an unconditioned response is natural reactions that happens when the unconditioned stimulus is presented.
Hi, my name is Cam and I'll be talking to you about conditional stimulus and conditional response. Conditional stimulus is a subconsciously learned behavior, either through repetitive action or very traumatic events. For example, this is for my athletes, when you hear the whistle of your coach, you know to immediately stop what you're doing and turn and face. That's not something that was learned per se, but subconsciously learned. Conditional response is a learned behavior throughout similar means, repetitive actions, but it's more learned. For example, when we were in class, high school, you knew when that bell rung.
I'm going to be talking about classical conditioning and spontaneous recovery. Classical conditioning is a type of learning where we connect two things to create a new learned response. The important idea is spontaneous recovery. This happens when a learned response seems to disappear but suddenly come back after some time has passed. For example, even if the dogs stop reacting to the ringing of the bell, they may start eventually salivating again at the sound after some time has passed.
Hi, my name is Wayne Bukajendu, but you know me as Kosi, and I will be talking about the last two stages of classical conditioning. The first one I'll be talking about is generalization. And you might be wondering, what is generalization? Generalization, which is also known as stimulus generalization in classical conditioning, is the tendency, after conditioning, to respond similarly to stimuli that resemble the conditioned stimulus. Generalization can also be adaptive, as children that are scared of cars could learn to be scared of trucks or motorcycles. And generalization can linger, sticking in our memory. For example, years after being in an Argentinian prison, a guard was reported to still flinch at the sight of black shoes after getting out of the prison, because that was the first glimpse of the torturers coming to his cell. Now let's talk about discrimination. Discrimination in classical conditioning is the learned ability to distinguish between a conditioned stimulus and similar stimuli that do not signal an unconditioned stimulus. For example, after eating a butterfly that makes them sick, birds will learn to generalize by staying away from similar looking butterflies, but they will also discriminate by eating other butterfly species that do not resemble such butterflies. When walking alone, somebody can avoid certain areas of where they have experienced harassment or gone through a traumatic event. Facing a guard dog, your heart is not going to race. But if you face a guide dog, you're fine.
The dogs began to salivate not only when presented the food, but also when the lab assistant who brought out the food came out. This observation led them to investigate. The dogs began to salivate not only when they were presented the food, but also when the lab assistant who usually brought out the food came out. This observation led them to investigate how these learned responses develop. Pavlov's experiment is important because it shows that learning can not only be based on conscious thought, but also on daily thinking, and can occur automatically, shaping behaviors, habits, and emotions through either humans or animals at the same time.
Hello, my name is Aya, and I'm be talking about acquisition and extinction. Acquisition is the intentional stage of learning or conditioning where a response is first established. This happens when a neutral stimulus becomes associated with an unconditional stimulus, leading to a conditioned response. Limiting a learning behavior when reinforce or stimulus that supported it, but it's no longer there. In classic conditioning, extinction only occurs when the conditioned stimulus is no longer paired with the unconditioned stimulus, leading to a decrease in conditioned response. I'm also doing food cravings as well, as I forgot. But food craving is often reflects to emotional and physical psychological needs, which signals stress, mood shifts, or memories, rather than actually being hungry. This is also mostly common in young adults, but it can be common in adults too.
Hi, my name is Garmar Dort, but you know me as Mar. I will be going over the Pavlov's classical conditioning experiment conducted by Ivan Pavlov that is learned through association. Pavlov originally set out to study digestion in dogs, but he noticed something unexpected. The dogs began to salivate not only when the food was presented, but also when they saw the lab assistant who usually brought out the food. This observation led him to realize
Extinction refers